Detective Frank Harris stopped the squad car in front of a neat two-story red brick house. It was an overcast May morning, heavy clouds hanging over the small town of Oakville as if to portend something bad. Harris grimaced as he looked at the crowd of onlookers gathered around him. In a small town like Oakville, news spread with the speed of wildfire, especially if it involved someone like Mary Johnson. Frank had been with the Oakville Police Department for 18 years, the last 7 as a detective. He was 45, and his naturally dark hair had already turned gray at the temples. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened, and under his eyes were permanent shadows from sleep deprivation and stress. Over the years, he'd seen a lot, but murder was rare in their town, and the murder of a prominent figure like Mary Johnson was exceptional. The police tape was already fencing off the area, and the young officer, Tim Riley, nodded to Harris to let him inside. Tim had a tense look on his face, and it wasn't surprising. The guy was only in his 2nd year on the force and had never faced a homicide before. "Forensics are here, Detective," Tim said nervously. "The body's on the 2nd floor in Mrs. Johnson's office." Harris nodded, putting on latex gloves. The house was impeccably tidy, which only emphasized the unnaturalness of what was happening. Light-colored walls, expensive furniture, antique vases and paintings in heavy frames. The house breathed prosperity and wealth. Mary had always been known for her impeccable taste. As he climbed the stairs, Harris recalled what he knew about the victim. Mary Johnson, born Mary Wilson, was a prominent figure in their small community. She had inherited the family drugstore chain from her father and had turned the modest business into a thriving enterprise with branches in 3 neighboring towns. After being widowed 10 years ago, Mary devoted herself fully to her work and raising her daughter. Many Oakville residents turned to her for help, and she never turned down support for local charitable initiatives. Mary's office was home to a forensics team led by Susan Lee, whom Harris had encountered on the few serious cases he had worked on. Susan nodded to him and stepped back, giving him a better view. Mary Johnson was lying on the floor near the massive oak desk. She was wearing a homemade dark blue dress, now stained with blood. A dark stain had spread around her head. Harris froze, feeling a heaviness in his chest. It was one thing to hear about the death of someone you knew, and quite another to see his body with his own eyes. "The preliminary cause of death is multiple blunt force trauma to the head," Susan said in a professional tone. "Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, death occurred between 20 and 22 hours yesterday." Harris's gaze slid around the office. There was an open laptop on the desk, the screen still glowing. The detective moved closer and saw the open Facebook page. On the screen was a picture, a radiant Mary in a cream wedding dress and a young man in a dark suit beside her. They were standing under an archway of white flowers, and Mary looked unexpectedly youthful and happy. Under the photo was the caption, "Happiest day of my life, starting a new chapter with my beloved Michael," and the date, 3 days ago. The photo gathered a lot of likes and comments, mostly congratulations, but there were also some that expressed surprise or contained strange hints. "Did she get married recently?" Harris asked Susan, although the answer was obvious. "Yes, a quiet ceremony. Few people were invited," Susan replied. A lot of people in town were surprised. She had only been dating the guy for a few months. "Michael Baker, I think." Harris nodded, making a mental note. He'd never met Mary's new husband, which was odd for a small town like Oakville, where everyone knew each other in one way or another. Where was he now? Downstairs in the living room. Officer Donovan is with him. He's in shock, but insists he wants to talk to the detective as soon as possible. Harris took another look around the crime scene, trying to commit every detail to memory. No obvious signs of forced entry. The murder weapon was missing. There were papers scattered on the table, some stained with blood. Maybe there was a struggle, or someone was looking for something after the murder. When Harris went down to the living room, he saw the man in the photo. Michael Baker looked to be in his mid-30s. Dark hair, attractive features, athletic build. He was now sitting hunched over on the couch, his face pale and his eyes reddened. "Mr. Baker, I'm Detective Frank Harris," Harris introduced himself, sitting down across from him. "I'm sorry for your loss. I realize this is a difficult time for you, but I need to ask you a few questions." Michael looked up at him with inflamed eyes and nodded. "I want to help. Someone killed Mary and I want that person to answer for it." His voice sounded hoarse but firm. Harris noted the lack of traces of blood on his clothes. White shirt, jeans, all clean. "Tell me what happened last night." Michael took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I worked at the bar until 11. It was an extra shift. One of the guys was sick. I called Mary around 9, told her I'd be late. She said it was okay, that she was working on some paperwork in her office. When I got home, it was almost midnight. I went upstairs and..." His voice shook. "I found her. I called the police right away." Harris made notes in his notebook, but was more watching Baker's body language. He looked genuinely shaken, but something in his story didn't seem quite genuine. "Where do you work, Mr. Baker?" "At the Blue Rabbit. It's a bar on the edge of town," Michael answered. "I've been bartending there for 3 years." Harris knew the place. A typical diner where factory workers and truckers gathered after work. Not the swankiest place in town. "How did you meet Mary?" A slight smile appeared on Michael's lips. "She came into the bar with a friend 6 months ago. We got to talking. Then she started coming in more often. It all happened very naturally. We fell in love." There was a tenderness in his voice that could have been sincere, or it could have been well played. Harris didn't jump to conclusions. "And you got married after only 6 months of knowing each other?" "When you know it's your man, why wait?" Michael replied, but something like guilt flickered in his eyes. "Mary was special. She saw things in me that others didn't." Harris nodded, making another note. An age difference, a hasty marriage, a big difference in social standing all, were signals that couldn't be ignored. Mary Johnson was one of the wealthiest women in Oakville, with a fortune estimated in the millions. And Michael Baker was just a bartender at a questionable establishment. Did Mary have any enemies? Someone who might have wished her harm? Michael shook his head. Everyone loved Mary. She was generous, kind. His voice trembled again. "The only thing I can imagine..." A lot of people were shocked by our wedding. There was talk, judgment. Especially after she posted a picture of us on Facebook. Some of the comments were not very nice. Not. Harris remembered the comments he'd seen under the photo. Now he had to look at them more closely. "Who was particularly against your marriage?" Michael hesitated. "I don't want to accuse anyone, but her daughter Emma never made any secret of the fact that she hated me. She was convinced I was only with Mary for the money. That's not true, Detective. I loved Mary. Yeah, we had an age difference, but it didn't matter." Harris wrote down Emma's name. He was going to have a tough conversation with the victim's daughter. "Where's Emma now?" "She's in college in Boston. I've already contacted her and she's on the next flight out." While they were talking, Harris couldn't stop analyzing the situation. A young, attractive man marries a wealthy woman who is considerably older than he is. Shortly after the wedding is publicly announced, she turns up dead. Too simple a scheme, almost cliched. But cliché often have some truth in them. "Mr. Baker, I'll need to talk to you again later. For now, I'm going to ask you to remain available and not to leave town without notifying the police." Michael nodded, looking Harris straight in the eye. "I'm not going anywhere, Detective. I want to find whoever did this." But as Harris was about to leave, Michael added a phrase that made the detective wary. "I know what you're thinking, Detective. A diner bartender marries a rich widow and then she dies. I'm not stupid, but I didn't kill Mary. I had no reason to. She loved me, and I loved her." Only people who really have reasons are so insistent on assuring otherwise, Harris thought as he left the house. And one more detail kept him wondering. Why had Michael so confidently stated that his wife had been murdered? Harris had never uttered the word murder in his conversation with him. It promised to be a long day, and this was just the beginning of an investigation that Harris felt would turn their small town's life upside down. Emma Johnson arrived in Oakville the day after her mother's body was discovered. Detective Harris met her at the police station, where she had gone straight from the airport. In her mid-20s, Emma already possessed the same determination that characterized her mother. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and a steely glint of steel shone through her tear-stained eyes. Harris ushered her into his office, a small room with worn furniture and filing cabinets. He offered her coffee, which she accepted, clasping the cup with both hands as if trying to keep warm. "I knew this would happen," Emma said instead of greeting. "I warned Mom. but she wouldn't listen to me. Harris let her speak without interrupting. After all those years on the force, he knew that sometimes the best way to get information was to just let people talk. "This Michael," Emma said her stepfather's name with undisguised contempt. "He came out of nowhere and immediately began to fascinate Mom. I saw right through him, Detective. The pretty face, the memorized compliments, the touching stories of a difficult childhood. All those tricks for naive single women." Harris made a note in his notebook. "A rough childhood?" Michael Baker never mentioned that to him. "Did you try to talk to your mother about your concerns?" Emma grinned bitterly. "Of course. We've been fighting about him for the last few months. I've tried to open her eyes, but Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "She said she was finally happy, that Michael made her feel young and needed. And when I insisted, Mom accused me of being selfish, said I was just afraid of losing my inheritance." The pain of being unfairly accused was audible in her words. Harris had known Emma since childhood, a clever girl, always serious beyond her years. After her father's death, she had grown even closer to her mother. It was hard to believe she cared more about money than Mary's well-being. "When did you hear about the wedding?" Emma's face contorted. "Facebook. Can you believe it? I open the feed and see a picture of my mom in her wedding dress next to this. No warning, no invitation. She introduced us 3 months ago and now she's married to him. I called her immediately. We had a terrible fight. I told her he was using her, that it was about money. And she said I should be happy for her, and that Michael was part of the family, whether I wanted him to be or not." Harris watched Emma carefully. Resentment, anger, grief, all of it was in her eyes. But was there something else there? Jealousy? Rage enough to kill? He reminded himself that no one in the investigation could be ruled out, not even the victim's daughter. "Tell me more about why you were so sure of Michael's selfish intentions." Emma opened her bag and pulled out a folder. "I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to do something. Here's his report." Harris took the folder with surprise. Not everyone was willing to spend money to check out their mother's new favorite. Opening the folder, he found several photos, printouts of correspondence, and a short written report. As he read, his eyebrows rose higher and higher. Michael Baker, real name Michael Rodriguez, had previously been seen in relationships with at least 3 wealthy older women. In all cases, the pattern was similar: meeting in a public place, a fast-paced affair, and talk of the future. In 2 cases, it did not come to marriage. Relatives intervened, or the women themselves broke off the relationship. In the 3rd case, the wedding took place, but the marriage lasted only 8 months and ended with the death of a woman from a heart attack. Michael received a substantial amount of insurance money, although there was no direct evidence of his involvement in his wife's death. "I sent this report to my mom a week before the wedding photo was released," Emma continued. "She called me in a rage, saying that I had overstepped my bounds and that she no longer wished to discuss her private life with me." Harris scrutinized the documents. The information was serious, and if it was confirmed, the motive for Michael was becoming obvious. "Why didn't you go to the police sooner?" Emma sighed. "With what wording, Detective? My stepfather is a rich lady hunter? That's not a crime, and Mom was a grown woman making her own decisions. I hoped she'd come to her senses. I never thought it would end up like this." Like this. After talking to Emma, Detective Harris went back to his office and called the law firm that handled Mary Johnson's cases. An hour later, Mary's attorney, Robert Clark, was already sitting across from him. The gray-haired man with the tired eyes was clearly not happy about the meeting. "Mary was my client for over 15 years, he said, handing Harris the requested documents. "Her death is not only a loss to the city, but a personal loss to me." Harris looked over the papers. As he had suspected, Mary had indeed changed her will after the wedding. Under the new document, signed just a week ago, most of her fortune, the business, the house, the bills, went to Michael Baker. The daughter was left with a small trust fund set up by her father. "That's unusual," Harris said. "Why did she change the terms of the will so drastically? Emma used to be the primary heir, didn't she?" Robert Clark looked uncomfortable. "That's privileged information, Detective, but given the circumstances..." "Yes, Emma was supposed to get the bulk of the inheritance. Mary always said her daughter was her greatest treasure." "What changed?" The lawyer hesitated. "I can't say for sure. Mary called me right after the wedding, insisted on an urgent meeting. She was very excited, talking about the new chapter in her life, about Michael supporting her as much as anyone. When I delicately expressed my doubts, she became irritated, said she was finally doing something for herself after so many years of living for others. Harris tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. Mary hadn't explained why she was leaving her daughter so little. She'd mentioned some conflict between them. She'd said that Emma should learn to respect her choices and that the trust fund money would provide her with a comfortable life, but would not allow her to squander a multi-generational fortune. This did not fit with the image of the Emma Harris knew. The girl had always been responsible, well-educated, not seen in scandals or wastefulness. After the lawyer left, Harris went back to studying the case file. He was particularly interested in the comments under the wedding photo on Facebook. Most were standard congratulations from friends and acquaintances, but a few clearly struck a different tone. A user named Old Friend wrote, "Congratulations, Mary. I hope you know what you're getting into. Some secrets are better left unsaid." Another comment, from a profile named Truth.Always, was more direct. "Ask your new husband about Helen Gordon of Willow Creek, or has he already forgotten about her?" And the last one, left a few hours before the supposed time of the murder, looked like a direct threat. "You'll regret this, Mary. Some mistakes cost too much." Harris wrote out all 3 user names and sent a request to the tech department to trace the IP addresses. Then he dialed the police department of Willow Creek, a small town in a neighboring county, to inquire about Helen Gordon. The call confirmed his fears. Helen Gordon, a 58-year-old widow who owned a local hotel, was indeed married to a man matching Michael's description. After her sudden death from a heart attack, he received a substantial sum of money and disappeared from town. The police suspected poisoning but found no evidence. The body had been cremated before suspicion was aroused. By evening, Harris had gathered enough information to build a preliminary version. Michael Baker, a professional hunter for the fortunes of single women. He seduced Mary, married her, got her to change her will, and then killed her to get the inheritance. A simple and logical theory, but the experienced detective knew that obvious theories don't always turn out to be true. Something was bugging him. If Michael had planned the murder, why had it happened so soon after the wedding and the change of will? It seemed too suspicious. Moreover, analyzing the comments showed that someone had clearly tried to warn Mary of the danger. Someone who knew about Michael's past. There were other questions. Why did Mary, an intelligent and successful woman, believe her new husband so easily? And what had caused her serious conflict with her daughter? So serious that she had almost disinherited her. Harris decided to visit Mary's house once more, now alone, to examine the crime scene more closely. The house was sealed by the police, but he had the key. It was late evening, and the empty house was oppressively quiet. He went slowly up to Mary's study. The room had already been cleaned of the body, but the dark stain on the floor and the scattered objects reminded him of the tragedy. The laptop had been taken away for examination, but Harris remembered exactly how it stood on the desk, open to the Facebook page with the wedding photo. The detective closed his eyes, trying to visualize the last minutes of Mary Johnson's life. It's evening. The house is quiet. Mary sits in her office, her laptop open in front of her. On the screen is a wedding photo published 3 days ago. She rereads the comments, smiles at her friend's congratulations, but a strange message catches her attention. "Ask your new husband about Helen Gordon from Willow Creek." Mary frowns as she scrolls through the comments. Suddenly, she hears the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They are the confident footsteps of someone who isn't hiding, someone she trusts. The office door opens. Mary turns, relief replacing wariness on her face. "What are you doing here?" she asks. The intruder doesn't answer, moves closer. Mary stands up, backs away from the wall. "I don't believe you," she says. The intruder's gaze falls on the laptop screen, and his face contorts with rage. "Looking through the photos?" The voice sounds cold. Mary has never heard such a tone from this man. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I won't let you deceive me." "It's too late," says the man who has come in. Mary reaches for the phone on the table. "Let me dial." She doesn't get a chance to finish. The intruder grabs a heavy marble statue from the shelf. and brings it down on Mary's head. A blow, another blow. Mary tries to defend herself, raises her arms, but the forces are too unequal. She falls to the floor, blood spreading across the light-colored carpet. Her eyes are still open, the question in them, why? The killer stares at the motionless body, then methodically wipes the statue with a cloth, returns it to the shelf. Looks around to make sure he's left no trace. Drops a few papers off the desk, giving the illusion of a struggle or a robbery. Then leaves the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Harris opened his eyes, coming back to reality. It was only a reconstruction, based on the facts at hand, but something still didn't add up. Although all the evidence pointed to Michael, Harris couldn't escape the feeling that he was missing an important detail, something lurking behind the obvious version, something related to the conflict between Mary and her daughter that the lawyer had mentioned. He looked around the office once more. His gaze fell on the framed photographs on the wall. Mary with her late husband, little Emma on her bicycle, a family portrait from 10 years ago. Happy faces, no premonitions of future tragedy. Next to them, a recently added wedding photo of Mary and Michael in a simple silver frame. Harris looked at it carefully. Something in the expression on Mary's face made him wonder. She was smiling, but there was something else in her eyes. Anxiety? Doubt? Or was he just seeing what he wanted to see, knowing the tragedy that followed? Harris sighed. Another conversation with Michael Baker was coming up tomorrow, and this time the detective planned to nail him with the new information. The killer must be punished, whoever he was. Harris was absolutely certain of that. The third day of the investigation came. Detective Frank Harris spent the morning at his computer, studying the financial documents related to the case. He had always believed that in murders of this nature, the answers were most often hidden in the cash flow. That was why he had requested not only Michael Baker's financial history, but also Emma Johnson's account information. What he discovered made him frown. Despite a good education and a promising job at an investment firm in Boston, Emma was mired in debt. Her credit cards were nearly maxed out, several loans were overdue, and for the past 3 months, she'd been making urgent requests for additional funds from her trust fund, quite modest by their family's standards. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. This didn't fit the image of the sensible and responsible Emma he'd known since childhood. What could have led the daughter of one of Oakville's wealthiest women into such financial trouble? And why had she hidden it during their first conversation? Information from the Financial Monitoring Service added even more questions. Over the past year, Emma had withdrawn more than $100,000 in cash from her accounts. Such transactions were always suspicious. Cash was hard to trace, which made it ideal for those who didn't want to leave a trail. Harris dialed the number of the forensic lab where the samples recovered from the crime scene had been sent. Blood, fibers, prints, anything that could point to the killer. "Anything new on the Mary Johnson case?" he asked, hearing the voice of Laura Page, the chief examiner. "Nothing definitive yet," Laura replied. "The prints on the statue we believe to be the murder weapon are too smudged to identify. But there is something interesting. We found traces of the victim's blood on the carpet in the hallway and on the banister of the stairs leading to the first floor. This meant that the killer had come downstairs after committing the crime and probably had traces of blood on him. Michael claimed to have found the body after returning from work around midnight, but his clothes were clean. Surely he'd had plenty of time to change his clothes, but that required an explanation. One more thing," Laura added. "We found particles of brightly colored fabric under the victim's fingernails. It looks like Mary fought back desperately and managed to snag her attacker's clothing. Bright red thread, presumably from a woolen garment." Harris made a note of it. Neither on Michael, nor in his belongings, had the police found anything bright red. But he remembered that Emma had been wearing a dark gray suit and a red wool scarf on the day they'd first met. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a murder investigation, there should be no coincidences. The next item on the day's agenda was to re-interview Michael Baker. This time, Harris invited him to the police station, wanting to create a more formal setting. Michael looked tired and depressed, but kept his cool. "Mr. Baker," Harris began after the standard formalities, "I have some new questions about your past. specifically about your relationship with Helen Gordon of Willow Creek. Michael's face changed. He turned pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. I was hoping it wouldn't come up, he said quietly after a long pause. Yes, I was married to Helen. And no, I had nothing to do with her death, although the Willow Creek police thought otherwise. Why did you conceal that fact? Would you reveal that you were suspected of murdering your previous wife? Michael grinned bitterly. I loved Helen. Her death was a blow to me. And when the accusations started, I just wanted a fresh start. By changing your name? Harris was skeptical. I just changed my mother's name back. No crime. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Look, detective, I understand how this looks, but I didn't kill Mary. You had a motive, Harris insisted. A well-to-do wife, a changed will. A will? Michael looked genuinely surprised. What will? Mary never said anything to me about changing the will. Either he was a terrific actor or he really didn't know. Harris decided to change tactics. Tell me about Mary's relationship with her daughter. Michael sighed. They were complicated. Emma never approved of me, that's understandable. But things had gotten much worse in recent months. I've heard their phone conversations several times. Mary was always upset after them. What was the cause of the conflict? Money. Michael shrugged. At least that's what Mary said. Emma was always asking for financial help, but she never explained why she needed such sums. Mary worried that her daughter might have gotten involved with bad company, perhaps even drugs. Shortly before our wedding, they had a particularly horrible scandal. Harris listened intently, taking notes. Michael's story matched the information about Emma's financial problems. That night, Emma called Mary hysterical, Michael continued. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but Mary was very upset. She told me that Emma had threatened her and said some terrible things. Things like, you'll regret it, and you can't stop me from getting what's rightfully mine anyway. The words seemed familiar to Harris. They echoed one of the threatening comments under the wedding photo. You'll regret it, Mary. Some mistakes cost too much. Mary wanted to help her daughter, Michael added, but she felt that simply injecting money would only make the problem worse. She said Emma needed to learn responsibility. Do you suspect Emma of killing her mother? Harris asked bluntly. Michael was silent for a long time, as if weighing his answer. I don't want to accuse anyone, he finally said. But Emma was furious about our wedding, and she was desperate for money. Mary had told him that her daughter had asked her for a large sum for some kind of one-time fix, but she'd refused to explain the details. Mary turned her down and Emma changed, cold, aggressive. It was scary. After the interview, Harris decided to check Emma's whereabouts the night of the murder. She claimed she was in Boston, at work, and then at her apartment. But a check revealed otherwise. Emma had taken 3 days off work, and her cell phone had been logged online near Oakville hours before Mary's murder. Now Harris had enough probable cause to search Emma's Boston apartment. He contacted the Boston police, and within hours he had information. A red wool sweater with marks that looked like blood had been found in a dumpster outside Emma's home. The sweater was torn, as if someone had torn it apart in a rage. But the most important piece of evidence was a surveillance tape from a gas station near Mary's house. It showed Emma filling up her car on the evening of the murder, just an hour before the estimated time of her mother's death. She was wearing the same red sweater. Harris sat in his office, piecing together the last pieces of the mosaic. Now he saw the picture completely differently. Michael wasn't the predator and Emma was the heartbroken victim. It was the exact opposite. After a few more phone calls, the detective received information that set the record straight. Emma Johnson was in debt because of her gambling addiction. She'd lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in Boston's underground casinos and owed dangerous people. She needed money, lots of money, and fast. Her mother's wedding, and the prospect of changing her will in favor of her new husband, was the last straw for Emma. She was the one who had left threatening comments under the wedding photo from various accounts, trying to plant doubts in her mother's mind. She was the one who found information about Michael's past and used it, not to protect her mother, but to create the perfect scapegoat. Harris summoned Emma to the police station, ostensibly for more questions. She arrived, confident, wearing a stern black dress, perfect for the image of a grieving daughter. Emma, Harris began when they were alone, I want to talk to you about the night your mother died. I already told you I was in Boston, she replied coldly. In my apartment. That's not true, Harris said softly. Your cell phone was registered here in Oakville, and we have security footage from a gas station 2 miles from your mother's house. You were there an hour before she died. Emma's face didn't change, but Harris noticed her fingers clenched on the armrests of the chair. Okay, I was there, she finally admitted. I wanted to talk to Mom, to explain to her why this marriage was a mistake, but then I changed my mind and drove back. I didn't see her that night. And the red sweater? Harris put the photo from the videotape on the table. The same fibers we found under your mother's fingernails. Now, Emma couldn't hide her reaction. Her eyes widened, and her breathing quickened. The red sweater you tore up and threw in the dumpster outside your house in Boston. A sweater with traces of your mother's blood on it, Harris continued. We've already tested it. It's her blood. You don't understand, Emma's voice shook. He was using her. She was going to give him everything that was supposed to be mine, what was supposed to belong to our family. I needed that money, Detective. You have no idea what they would have done to me if I hadn't paid. Harris stared at her in silence, letting the truth come out. I didn't mean to kill her, Emma whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. I just wanted to talk, explain that I was in danger. But she started talking about Michael, about how he understood her, how supportive. She said she'd changed my will, that I'd only get my father's foundation and nothing else, that I should learn to live within my means. Emma fell silent, looking somewhere through the wall. She sat there, at her desk, with an open page of that stupid wedding photo, and she was telling me about responsibility. Me! When she herself had jumped out to marry the first man she met, who was 25 years younger than she was. Emma's voice rose to a shout, then dropped back to a whisper. I saw the statue on the shelf, just grabbed it, and I don't remember how many times I hit it. I just remember the look in her eyes when she realized it was the end. Harris closed the notebook. He had a full confession. Emma Johnson, the model daughter of a respected family, had killed her own mother for money, and then tried to frame her new husband in cold blood. Emma Johnson, you are under arrest for the murder of Mary Johnson, Harris said formally. You have the right to remain silent. 3 months later, Frank Harris sat on a bench in a city park, watching children playing. Mary Johnson's case was closed. Emma pleaded guilty by reason of passion and received 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 10 with good behavior. Michael Baker left Oakville immediately after the trial. Although his name has been cleared, the city will always associate him with the tragedy. In his will, which was never changed because of the too short time between its drafting and Mary's death, he received a house and a substantial amount of money. The rest of the property, including the business, went to a charitable trust set up in Mary Johnson's name. Harris often thought about the case, about how easily bias can affect an investigation, how sometimes the most obvious suspects turn out to be innocent and the most unbelievable versions turn out to be true, and about how greed and desperation can turn a loving daughter into a cold-blooded killer. It was a reminder that even in a small and quiet town like Oakville, darkness can lurk behind the noblest of facades, and that his job as a detective was always to look deeper than first impression, to get to the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. The ringing of a cell phone snapped him out of his reverie. A new case. Life went on.